publications and things are.
Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Rollbacks of DEI initiatives, an end to teleworking for federal employees, hundreds of January 6th rioters pardoned for their crimes, and the federal government will only recognize two genders, male and female. These are just a few of the laundry list of executive orders President Donald Trump unleashed on day one with promises of many, many more. This is Trump 2.0. How will his second term impact African Americans, and what is the call to action for the Black community? In short, what's next? We have assembled a panel of civil rights experts to help assess and address the latest Trump actions. My guests are Patrice Willoughby, Chief of Policy and Legislative Affairs for the NAACP, and Glenn Harris, President of Race Forward. Thank you both for joining this important conversation. I appreciate your time.
It's great to be here.
Can you both hear me?
Absolutely.
So there we go. Wonderful. So let me just start with some foundational stuff. And I'll start with you, Patrice. Your reaction to what happened last night, for example, with the pardoning or just letting these January 6th rioters go, and some of the other things that were signed in these executive orders by President Trump.
So what I want to contextualize is the strategy of the incoming administration, because what is happening, they've referred to it as shock and awe or whatever they want to refer to it as, but it's really swarm theory. If you look at some classic theories of warfare, the idea being that you have to defend everything so that you can't defend anything well. So that's the context. I think that my response to it, it's not surprise, but it was disappointment. But I also think that it's important for us to keep our eyes on the prize and understand that this is meant to, one, discourage people from fighting, as well as present a fully anti-Black agenda. And so we have to keep that in mind as the foundation.
Mm-hmm. Glenn, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I couldn't. Patrice, I think you nailed it. Several people have said this, but, leading up to this moment, believe what people say. And the truth of the matter is they're doing exactly what they said they were going to do. Also believe that, the strategy is rooted in division. Surprise, surprise. It's rooted in driving deeper divisions, especially between Black and brown people, between race and gender. And I think what's critical in this moment is that we lean into our critical thinking skills, that we take a moment and really analyze what's happening. To Patrice's point about responding to 100 different executive orders, that's just a distraction. We have 4 years ahead of us. We need to pace ourselves, be clear about our opportunities, and stand strong and firm in our values and ideals.
To be specific, there are 1,458 days. Exactly.
Right.
1,458 days. But you said these executive orders are meant to divide, and you started off dividing Black and brown people. Drill down a little bit more for me on that, Glenn. What do you mean?
I think it's been a core part of their strategy from day one. But what we see, just looking at, for example, the attacks on DEI, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The reality is that those attacks are really designed to weaken the ways in which Black and brown communities have come together to recognize how issues of systemic racism impact us collectively. And so by actually tearing them apart, it actually requires all of us to hustle to get what we need. That's what our communities have always done. And in doing that, we always run the risk of actually being in competition with each other. So the essential piece for me in this is that we're just really clear that this is a strategy to divide people. It is a strategy to move, simply an authoritarian, attack on democracy at its core. Because here's the piece that for me, in our work, that at the end of the day, there's no democracy without racial justice. And we're not getting to racial justice without a meaningful democracy. And the intention of this administration is to break the back of that possibility. So when I talk about, and I think that division, to be clear, is not just between Black and brown people, whether, thinking about the attacks that we see on immigration. It is also attacks on gender. It is fundamentally designed to take every community that has been marginalized historically by this country and put them back in a position where they have to compete with each other.
Let me play for both of you. I want you to compare and kind of contrast something that President Trump said yesterday during his inauguration speech, and then I'll have you react on the other side.
Today is Martin Luther King Day, and his honor, this will be a great honor, but in his honor we will strive together to make his dream a reality. We will make his dream come true. This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based.
Patrice, what did you hear with those two sound bites?
Well, I heard a perversion of Dr. King's words. I also heard a perversion of the principle behind diversity, equity, and inclusion, because DEI, first of all, they have misappropriated the term. I mean, in that strategies for DEI or DEI or inclusion and belonging, they ensure that qualified people are found at every demographic and within every group, because the studies show that decision making is made better by diverse workforces and leadership. So that's one. They have conflated that idea with the idea of preferences or guaranteed outcomes, because to Glenn's point, there is a significant part of the population that have fallen behind because of globalization and economic trends, and they are looking for something to hang that hat on, and they're substituting the progress of Black and brown communities, which has been made in spite of systemic discrimination, but they are framing the problems of some disadvantaged white communities on Black and brown people, and labeling that DEI in order to camouflage what has really happened, which is consolidation in industries, globalization, and the flows of capital to where they can be very productive or most productive. That has contributed to wage stagnation and a lot of economic problems that people have. And the use of DEI in race is just a convenient substitute for telling the truth about economics and about the real interests of oligarchs and billionaire class.
So what do you tell a white person, Patrice, who says to you, well, Patrice, what's wrong with a colorblind society?
Well, I think that if you ignore color, then you also ignore the lived experiences of people that make decision making better, because we've never been a colorblind country. But there is recognition now that we need to have the best brains and everyone's input in order to move the country forward. It's really whether or not you see this as being a zero-sum game, or you understand that in the arc of American history, we have grown and become successful as a country because of the contributions of everyone. And so that's why that use of DEI is really a perversion of it.
Glenn, your thoughts about what you heard from the president in those two sound bites?
And I would just build off what Patrice shared. There's never been a moment when this country has been race neutral. And the reality is that we have work to do to actually make the country live up to the dream that Martin Luther King laid out. And that includes not only having a vision for a future in which everyone prospers, it includes addressing what have historically been the realities for marginalized communities. And the benefit of that, I think this is the piece that's so important. I really appreciated the question, Harold, about so what does this mean for white folks? The benefit is that our collective success is our collective success. It doesn't matter what issue you look at. The idea of equity is a simple one. If we can really focus on those who are most marginalized, most vulnerable, and come up with a solution for them, it works better for everyone. And we can list endless examples, right? Curb cuts is a frequently used example of just naming those curb cuts were designed for folks who have disabilities. But the truth is they benefit all of us. And so really taking the time to understand that the success of Black and Brown communities, the success of women strengthens all of our communities, strengthens our local neighborhoods, strengthens what we all want, which is success and, our family to be able to thrive and achieve. And so I think that perversion for me really just stands out as trying to take what Dr. King was naming and standing it on its head. We've seen it before, but I always lean into Vincent Harding, civil rights activist, and love his frame that I am a citizen of a country that does not exist yet. And that we are collectively on a process, have been on this journey to actually get to that promise. And last thing I have to say is that promise, there is no conflict between equity and merit. Those things are not oppositional. It is merit-based. And so in that way, I think, really in this moment, standing clear about, what was Dr. King's dream? What was he truly naming? And who are the folks who truly represent it? I always say, just have to share this, Patrice and Harold. The truth of the matter is that we keep getting attacked by race over issues of race. But the truth is that the Republican Party is a white party. It is representative of white people. All of their policies, platforms have been racialized. And the question is, are we willing to have an honest conversation that's about not pitting ourselves against each other, but how we collectively can win? And for me, that's the most heartbreaking part of this last election, is that we lost the thread. Truth of the matter is we all collectively as a nation need to have a conversation about my success being tied to your success. So, I find the conversation from the president infuriating, and look forward to all of us collectively finding opportunities to have the discussion we really need to have about our collective success.
We are going to take a quick break, but don't forget, you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on our website, WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the Black community and the new Trump administration. What is next? My guests are Patrice Willoughby, Chief of Policy and Legislative Affairs for the NAACP, and Glenn Harris, President of Race Forward. Patrice, yesterday during his speech at Metropolitan AME Church in D.C., Reverend Al Sharpton called for boycotts in the coming months. He was promising to name at least 2 companies to target within the next 90 days. What do you see as the call to action or actions even for people of color? And, what action should we be taking to kind of push back on this new assault on civil rights?
Well, I think it's important to remember that as a community, as a Black community, we're not monolithic. So there's a role for everyone to take in order to broaden equity in whatever sphere you find yourself operating. I think one of the most important things that we can remember is, and to think about, is the scope of history, and to maintain emotional discipline so that we are not continually distracted by the chaos that this administration is going to throw at us. With respect to our economic strength, we wield incredible strength in shaping the economy. And I think it's incumbent on everyone to be intentional, to align your spend, your family budget, and your entertainment with those products and services and offerings that align with your values. And it's time for us, as Greg has indicated, to exercise our critical thinking skills in terms of where we are spending our hard-earned money, because there's no reason to benefit people that do not support Black and Brown communities. I also think that in terms of our next steps, the distinguishing from mis and disinformation is critically important. To find accredited sources for information like Race Forward, like the NAACP, the Urban League, National Council of Negro Women, the Lawyers Committee, the Legal Defense Fund, and use those as your sources of information as opposed to what you read online. It's really important that we not spread mis and disinformation and be sent down rabbit holes, because that will dissipate everyone's energy. And then it's part of their strategy is to cloud the water and flood the zone always with lots of misinformation, and people don't know what to believe. It's one of the problems that we have right now, is that people don't understand even what government does and can't do. And so being disciplined about your sources of information is really important. And then finally, I think aligning with organizations that are doing the type of work that you want to see done to advance equity. And that can be your social and civic organizations, your organizations that are right there in your local community. And then also keeping on track of your elected officials. And when you hear someone say something that's crazy, to challenge it, to call into that elected official's office and make your voice be known. Because one of the problems that we have in the way that we engage our government is we think that decisions are immediate. They can be, but it takes concerted long-term effort and paying attention and holding our elected officials accountable in order to make change.
You said a whole lot just there. A whole bunch. So let me take that in pieces. As it
We've been
relates,
thinking about it a lot.
and listen, these pieces are really, really important because you said, we are certainly not monolithic, and boycotts of businesses. This is not the the era of the Montgomery bus boycott. Okay, and we know that is not the case, and we also know, as you said, in not being monolithic, that in deciding to boycott one company, I mean, there are at least a dozen names that we know, and some others that have quietly been eliminating DEI. Okay, and some people could interpret that as changing with the times. Some people can interpret that as they don't care about Black folks, and so whether it's marching, because Black folks love to march and they love to protest, and maybe, and some could argue even more than they love to vote for some reason. Is that really going to make a difference? Do you think a boycott of John Deere, for example? We know there are Black farmers, but maybe that may not be the best one. Help me with that, Patrice.
So here's the thing. If you look at Project 2025 or the America First agenda, what's abundantly clear is that this administration and the grifters and oligarchs that align with them, they are not opposed to money. They're opposed to public money going to help communities and empower communities that can oppose authoritarianism. And with that in mind, money is the framework that has run this country for a long, long time. And that's why it's really important for us as Black and Brown people to be very conscious of our money and our resources. So that means at the micro level, the idea of your own household, how you're spending your money, but at the level of the government as well, looking where this administration may be trying to use public resources and divert them to people who don't need them or put them under private control. So that's really critically important to follow. And if they're focused on money and disempowering people like the federal workforce, dismantling the Department of Education. These are the mechanisms that have always empowered our communities, allowed us to engage economically, allowed us to become well educated. Don't ever keep your eye off of the money, and ensure that your money aligns with your values. And among your cohort of people that you associate with, provide some thought leadership to them as well, so that all of us working collectively really can reshape the behavior that is anti-Black.
So let me ask you about this, and I've not forgotten about you, Glenn, but like I said, Patrice said a lot, and I want to give her a chance, and actually touched on one of the points that I was going to bring up, but you talked about watching where you get accurate information. And I think that is such a critical point. And I've said this on this program before. You have truth and then you have facts. Okay. And your truth may indeed be true for you, but it may not be a fact. So, and when you're talking about people who are not of a certain age, who did not grow up with legacy media, who are now getting their information from people who sound good, but may just be influencers in their own kitchens. Where do you, how do you do that? I mean, listen, I have no doubt that the NAACP is telling me, a Black man, the truth. But is it also fact. You see what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
so, first, Patrice, how do you talk to people, again, who have been convinced by the president that legacy media, Washington Post, LA Times, NBC News, CBS News, is not telling them the truth?
Correct. So, I think that we have to meet people where they are. I think that this is part of the intergenerational discussion. At the NAACP, our media, our communication shop has a lot of folks in it that are in their mid 20s and into their early 30s. And we do a lot of listening to understand what those conversations are. But all of us that are connected with young people have a responsibility to listen to what their concerns are and then to provide alternate sources of information. And when we hear things that don't sound right, because someone's truth and what they're feeling, their visceral reaction is their truth. We're not going to be able to influence that conversation if we just say to them, you don't feel the way you do, because that is the problem that we have, and one of the reasons why younger people tend not to listen to traditional sources of media as well. It's why people don't believe in the economy, because they've been told, for example, this last campaign, that the economy is doing great, but they don't feel it in their pocketbook. So we have to listen to people and then to help them find sources of information or explain things and break it down to them, because people move from A to M and they don't go B, C, D, E, F, G all the way through the alphabet. And we need to really break a lot of complex issues down into their components when we engage with folks.
Glenn?
Couldn't agree more. Misinformation and disinformation, especially given that it's been, the trademark of this administration, it's huge. It's critical. And there's a huge amount of distrust. And as Patrice said, it's understandable. I think, one of the things I want to say is just reinforce what Patrice said, which is find sources you trust and listen to them. I think it's really important, right? Whether that's the NAACP or Race Forward or, whoever you think you can find information. But the other thing I really want to lift up is just two thoughts on this. One is facts and truth, that you were naming, Harold. The truth of the matter is that understanding is not about facts or truths. It's about learning, about a deep commitment to learning more. And so I think in that way, one of the things that I would always, try to live by it myself, but encourage other folks, which is don't just, if you care about something, invest in it. Look for deeper information, not just sound bites. And so I think in that way, one of the things that's really critical is understanding that all of us have been through a process of miseducation and misinformation in this country. And it's critical on all of us to invest in trying to understand what that history has meant and how it informs us now and how it informs our decision-making forward. Second piece that just, want to name is how important it is that we find and take collective action once we have information. So, just coming back to the question, what do we do in this moment? We get organized. We find the people in our lives who share our values, and we look for collective action. And while I think it's essential that all of us use our values to inform our own personal decisions, whether they're financial, et cetera, about how our actions live into our values, what makes change is when we do that collectively. And it works, whether it's a boycott or it's a protest. Or whether it's actually just lifting up success. And that's the last piece that for me in this moment, at Race Forward, deeply believe real change happens locally. We were just talking about the civil rights movement. We talk about it all the time. It wasn't a national movement. It was a movement in Selma. It was a movement in Birmingham. it was those local actions that created the possibility for national change. Real change happens in our neighborhoods, in our local communities, and then gets elevated. And so how important it is in this moment that we're really thinking about who's running for our local offices. How are they reflecting our values? What are the policies that we can support? Right now, we saw this in Trump 1.0, and Trump 2.0 is going to be more true than ever, that the line that's going to be held is going to be held by local government.
Let me ask you this.
So I think it's critical that we invest our time into government locally.
Let me ask you this, Glenn. As you know, the president, and I mentioned this earlier, he pardoned or commuted the sentences of the January 6th rioters, but he also did the same for the head and some members of the Proud Boys, which arguably is just a modern version of the Ku Klux Klan. I don't think anybody can debate me on that, and you can if you want, because I'll throw hands. I mean, it's obviously, it's quite obvious. As a Black person, Glenn, what message do you believe has been sent as it relates to the commuting of the sentence of the Proud Boys leader, as well as some other members of the Proud Boys? And should I, as a Black person, be afraid?
That's such a where you ended. Should I be afraid? That's such a profound question. You know, my pops grew up in just outside of Tuskegee, Alabama. In the midst of the height of Jim Crow. And I deeply believe that fear is just we all share it as humans. But what I know as Black people is that we are the bravest people who've walked this country. And that for me, I lean into the reality of my ancestors, where my people come from and the fights they've made. And I see that not only as a strength, but a duty to follow in the footsteps of giants. And so I think it's reasonable to feel fear, and it's essential that we stay rooted in who we are and where we come from as we think about how to move forward. To your point, folks in hoods have always tried to intimidate us, and that ain't happening. Those days are over. And I think it's essential that we stay rooted in who we are, where we come from, and a reminder that the world we're hoping for is actually, ironically, a better world for them. And I think that's the piece that I always try not to lose sight of. The letting folks off the hook for the violence that they committed in 2020 is deeply disturbing and scary about what it actually puts out. But simultaneously, I believe in a world, stay committed to it because I know my family did, in which people can change. I've seen it in doing this work. And so my hope, not being naive, but my hope is that we never lose sight of that in our fear, it doesn't turn simply to anger, is what I mean.
So,
that
Patrice,
at the core, we're really open for that kind of outcome.
If Glenn is correct, that we shouldn't be afraid, should we be worried if the most powerful person in the world does not recognize what the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers represent, or maybe he does, and is still willing to give them a pass? If we should not be afraid, should we be worried? And how do we protect ourselves I use the word protect. I don't mean defend,
Mhm.
but I mean protect ourselves.
So first of all, the best way to protect ourselves is to be in community and to be aware and to be informed. Uh, information, real information, is a great deterrent to fear. This
Explain
incoming
that.
administration,
Explain that.
information or understanding, breaking things down to root causes, understanding why people are doing what they are doing, understanding what can and cannot be done. So, for example, let's use some of these executive orders announced yesterday that the administration is going to end birthright citizenship. Which is, children born of people who have immigrated are not necessarily going to be given citizenship. I could see a whole flutter of activity, but would require rescinding a constitutional amendment, which would require a very long process. And beside that, executive order's already been challenged in court. So I think it's important to break things down like that to understand what can and can't be happening. DOGE, that supposed department, is nothing. It's not a government agency or a government department because Congress controls the purse. Congress controls setting up new government agencies. It cannot eliminate the Department of Education because committees or councils like that, they fall under what's called the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Their meetings have to be open to the public. Their proceedings have to be published. They can't unilaterally make decisions. They can make recommendations. That's already been challenged in the court. When entities throw things at you, do you realize how much progress Black Americans have made since we were brought to the North and South Hemisphere? And in the 248 or so years of this country, we have made astronomical progress using the levers of government and each other in community to advance our own self-determination. And that is why we're at this inflection point right now, because they are throwing everything in the book that they can at us to limit that progress and also to limit the ability of poor, marginalized brown and Black people to actually frame out the democracy that we need to have in order to make things better for everyone. And so, should we be worried? We should be aware, but we should also be aware of our own power. Because when people throw everything at the book at you, I take it as a badge of honor. It actually means that you're winning. And that means that you have to stay focused and not get distracted by the chaos and keep your eyes forward, working with others to advance goals together.
In these last few minutes, we are joined by Damon Hewitt, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Mr. Hewitt, thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Thanks so much for having me on the tail end of the conversation, and greetings, colleagues.
Let me ask you, because one of the last questions that I was receiving some feedback from was about executive orders, and specifically as it related to pardoning or commuting the sentences of January 6th rioters, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers. We saw the kinds of Confederate flags that these people were flying, the fact that on January 6th of 2021 that they were also attacking law enforcement officers. I mentioned before, as it relates to, for example, the Proud Boys, that they are just a modern reiteration of the Ku Klux Klan. Fight me on that if you want. But my question to you is, how do people of color, particularly Black people, protect themselves against the kind of action that President Trump took last night? And should we be worried? Should we be afraid?
Well, I believe, Harold, there's a lot to worry about here. this is yet another resurgence. It seems like we know that there's cycles of reform and retrenchment, but it seems to be more compressed cycles than ever before. It's not like you have we had a Reconstruction for a dozen years after the Civil War. And this was not really a Reconstruction we had the last 4 years, but here we go. Whatever it was, it's the end of it, right? And we're in a different era of retrenchment. I will say this, though. When I saw the images of the Proud Boys marching in the streets with their regalia on, what struck me was not fear. What struck me was, oh, this is a reminder of exactly why we're already suing these folks. We sued them before, and we have an active lawsuit against the Proud Boys, Trump in his individual capacity, his 2020 campaign, and the Oath Keepers, and a number of individuals who've just been granted pardons or clemency, commutations by this president. We've been suing them for the last few years in a lawsuit representing Capitol Police officers who were on the front lines that day, many of whom are Black men who were defending life, liberty, property, but also democracy itself. And so it's just a reminder that we do have ways to fight. And it's also a reminder of how important the civil rights part of the fight is. You know, when you think about the avenues of accountability, you had the criminal prosecution process, which has been eviscerated. You had the political process, which didn't end with this election. It ended with the end of the Select Committee a couple of years ago. And now you have this civil rights and civil accountability. Honestly, it's in federal court, so it's not as if a win is ever guaranteed in any court, but it is in the District of Columbia. And so we believe we have a very good chance of prevailing and bringing justice. And it's one of the last clear chances to bring justice. So it reminds me, it should remind all of us, not that, oh, woe is us and what are we going to do, but that we have been fighting and that we must continue to fight back and fight forward.
I think that is going to, unfortunately, have to be the last word in this conversation. I do want to thank all of you, Glenn Harris with Race Forward, Patrice Willoughby with the NAACP, and Damon Hewitt with the Lawyers Committee. I really appreciate your time, and we will be in touch because, as I mentioned in the beginning, we don't have a lot of time. Obviously, we only have 1,458 days left. So I say tongue in cheek. Anyway, thank you all so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Sure thing. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. I'm Harold Fisher.